Following the conclusion of our ancient food series, we now move into the medieval period, exploring the cuisine of the Eastern Roman Empire. Our sources for Byzantine food are varied. They range from agricultural manuals to descriptions of imperial banquets written by emperors themselves. We also have accounts from travelers, poems that describe food, as well as medical treatises that often include dietary advice. Before we begin, there are two important points to keep in mind. First, the Eastern Roman Empire lasted for over 1,000 years. Naturally, it is impossible to treat such a long period as a single unchanging whole. While many eating habits remain consistent, others clearly evolved over time. Second, most of our surviving sources focus on Constantinople, the imperial capital. This was a city where both luxurious banquets and the simplest foods could be found. Although some information survives for other regions of the empire, both urban and rural, it is far more limited by comparison. As a result, we will focus primarily on Constantinople, with occasional reference to dishes and culinary practices from elsewhere in the empire. Cooking within the household was primarily the domain of women. However, professional cooking, especially in public settings or in the imperial kitchens, was carried out by men. Although most people ate at home, there were many public places where food could be purchased or received. In cities, towns, and along major roads, one can find the Kapilion, the Byzantine tavern. These establishments primarily sold wine, but they almost always offered simple foods to accompany it. Many also functioned as small shops selling everyday goods. Another common establishment was the Pandokion, an inn found both in towns and the countryside. These provided lodging for travelers and served meals as well. Along the roads, monasteries played an important role. Through their charitable institutions known as xenodochia, they offered both lodging and free food to weary travelers. Finally, in Constantinople and occasionally other urban centers, the emperors frequently distributed free food, especially on holidays or during times of hardship. Cereals were the foundation of Byzantine cuisine. Wheat was the most highly prized and considered the most nutritious. Barley, while common, was regarded as a lower quality grain. Emmer was often used as a fallback during times of scarcity. Millet and oats were considered the most inferior grains, primarily used for animal feed and only eaten by people in times of famine. Rice was cultivated in the empire, but it was rare and usually prepared as a dessert. The most common forms of flour came from wheat, emmer, and barley. Bread formed the backbone of the Byzantine diet. White wheat bread, leavened with a moderate amount of yeast and lightly salted, was considered the finest. Some recipes included spices such as anise and fennel seeds, while sesame seeds or almond oil were also occasionally added. Another highly sought-after ingredient was masticha, a resin obtained from the mastic trees of Chios, a Greek island in the Aegean Sea. It was widely used in bread and other baked goods, especially on holidays. Wholemeal or bran breads, darker and denser, were commonly consumed and valued for their digestive benefits, even if they were considered less prestigious than white bread. Paksimadi, a thick, twice-baked barley bread, was a typical food for soldiers and travelers because it could be stored for long periods without spoiling. The soldiers also ate voukelaton, a ring-shaped, twice-baked loaf. Because of their hardness, both of these foods were usually softened by dipping in water before consumption. Finally, koulouritsi was a ring-shaped bread roll that was made in the bakeries of the cities. The Byzantines also prepared cereals in other ways. Porridges and gruels were common, made from wheat and emmer. Tragos, or tragana, was a dish made by mixing dried cracked emmer with milk or yogurt, shaping it into small lumps and storing it. These lumps could later be boiled into a sour or savory soup. We also know that the Byzantines commonly prepared a dish called pita, which could take the form of either a flatbread or a pie and was typically filled with cheese, herbs, and vegetables. Legumes were also a staple of Byzantine cuisine. widely consumed by both rich and poor, and were among the favored foods of priests and monks. These included lentils, chickpeas, broad fava beans, grass peas, and black-eyed peas. Surviving recipes indicate that legumes were prepared as soups or salads, often with olive oil, cumin, salt, pepper, and vinegar. Both cultivated vegetables and gathered wild greens were eaten by the Byzantines. Common choices included leek, lettuce, endive, mallow, orach, beet greens, asparagus, cucumber, leaf celery, eggplant, scallion, cress, mustard greens, and purslane. Root vegetables such as onions, garlic, wild carrots, beets, turnips, radishes, and grape hyacinth bulbs were also widely consumed. By the Middle Byzantine period, spinach had been introduced and quickly became popular. Vegetables were typically dressed simply, most often with olive oil, vinegar, and fish sauce. Some were cooked and served as soups or stews, while others were eaten raw. Although we know today that mushrooms are fungi, the Byzantines classified them as vegetables. In general, mushrooms were treated with caution, but truffles were a highly sought-after delicacy, especially among the nobility. Meat consumption in Byzantium varied greatly by wealth and location. While the wealthy ate meat frequently, most people consumed it only on special occasions or roughly once a week. Livestock animals included pigs, sheep, goats, cattle, chickens, geese, and ducks. By far the most common meats were pork and chicken, followed by lamb and goat. Cattle meat was less common and only increased in consumption after the Crusades due to Western European influence. Cattle provided beef and veal, with veal often preferred for its tender texture. Meat was prepared in various ways. It could be roasted, stewed in pots with aromatic herbs, or boiled and served with flavorful sauces. The meat shops of Constantinople and other cities offered slices of meat roasting on spits. Pork was eaten both roasted and stewed. Suckling pigs were especially prized for their rich and tender meat and were usually oven roasted and served with a honey and vinegar sauce. Pork sausages, known as lucanica or salsicchia, were very common. Minced meat was mixed with herbs and spices such as parsley, rue, savory, pepper, and cumin, sometimes with the addition of pine nuts and fish sauce, then stuffed into thin intestines and occasionally smoked for preservation. Sausages were most commonly eaten with mustard. The Byzantines developed methods of curing and preserving pork. Apokti, a form of dried and salted pork loin, involved soaking the meat in vinegar, rubbing it with cinnamon, black pepper, and savory, and then hanging it to dry for several weeks. Another famous dried meat delicacy in Constantinople was paston, made from either pork or beef. Paston is the ancestor of the famous pastırma, eaten in Turkey, Armenia, Bulgaria, Greece, and other neighboring countries. As previously mentioned, chicken was widely consumed and prepared in a variety of ways. One well-documented method was monothylasis, in which a chicken was stuffed with a mixture of almonds, small pieces of bread, and aromatic herbs, then roasted in an earthenware dish. Another preparation involved baking chicken in pastry. A third technique, known as kolimbas, called for soaking small chickens in red wine with aromatic seasonings before cooking. Yet another distinctive dish was afraton, which used minced chicken combined with a large quantity of beaten egg whites to create a light, foamy mixture. This mixture was placed over a shallow casserole containing a fish sauce and cooked over coals, allowing the steam from the sauce to gently set the topping. The dish was then finished with a drizzle of wine or honey before serving. In Constantinople, sheep and goats were brought into the city from surrounding mountain areas, and strict regulations ensured that meat was sold through appointed butchers, maintaining quality and price control. Lamb and goat meat were most commonly spit roasted, and contemporary sources note that the meat of female goats was preferred to that of males. Lamb was especially associated with the celebration of Easter Sunday, during which whole sheep were roasted on large spits over open fires. A well-known dish was plektin or hordi, lamb or goat intestines wrapped around offal and grilled. The dish today is widely known in many countries as kokorets. Animal fats likewise played an important role in Byzantine cooking. Lard from pigs and various domesticated birds was widely used, both for frying and for preserving food. For those who could afford it, livestock meat was generally accessible, as large urban markets, annual fairs, and a tightly regulated trade network ensured a steady supply throughout the empire. In addition to domesticated animals, game meat played a significant role in the Byzantine diet, particularly among the nobility and among rural populations living near forests and mountains. Commonly consumed game animals included deer from Europe, gazelles from Anatolia, wild goats, boars, donkeys and oxen, and even bears from the Pindus, Rhodope and Balkan mountains. Hare was especially popular, while rabbit remained largely unknown east of Italy. Game birds were especially prized, particularly among the elite. A variety of species were eaten, including ducks, geese, pigeons, partridges, francolins, turtle doves, quail, mallards, peafowl, cranes, and thrushes. Rarer species were bred on imperial estates or aristocratic country villas, often raised in enclosed gardens known as paradisia. Birds were prepared in many ways: roasted, stewed, or cooked with wine, fat, and spices for special occasions. Spit roasting, sometimes using multi-pronged spits, was particularly popular, while salt curing allowed meat to be preserved for feasts or long journeys. Eggs were a common and versatile food in Byzantine cuisine, eaten both on their own and as ingredients in a wide range of dishes. Chicken eggs were considered the finest and were the most widely consumed, while duck eggs were regarded as heavy and difficult to digest. Rarer eggs, such as those of geese, partridges and pheasants, were known delicacies, whereas peahen eggs were generally not recommended. Eggs from small birds such as quail were also eaten, though some considered them nutritionally weak. Eggs were prepared in many ways. They could be boiled, baked, or fried, and were often served with black bread, cheese, greens, or olives. The most popular egg dish was the sfougaton, a type of omelette in which eggs were beaten and cooked until fluffy, either baked or fried in olive oil. It commonly included onions and cheese, as well as other vegetables or herbs, and was occasionally enriched with meat or fish. According to both literary and archaeological sources, evidence indicates substantial consumption of dairy products in the Eastern Roman Empire. These products were made primarily from sheep and goat milk, with cow milk used far less frequently. Fresh milk was consumed and valued for its flavor and nutritional qualities, often drank on its own or used as a base for various dishes. Yogurt, known as oxygala, was widely available and was sometimes produced by fermenting milk in sheepskins, resulting in a pleasantly tangy product. It was also occasionally strained. Although most of the ancestors of the Eastern Romans considered butter to be a barbaric food, it is well established that butter was consumed in the Byzantine Empire. Alongside olive oil and lard, it became a major component of cooking. Butter was usually made from sheep milk and at times from goat milk. By far the most widely consumed dairy product, however, was cheese. Fresh cheeses were often kept in brine, while harder varieties were aged, smoked, or preserved with herbs such as thyme and savory. Some cheeses were soaked in vinegar or honey to enhance flavor and extend their shelf life. Cheese-making techniques were diverse. Milk was curdled using rennet from young goats, salt, fig sap, or even the leaves and shoots of artichokes. From the sources, we know of several varieties of cheese. Arthotiro was a white whey cheese with a slightly sweet flavor. Mizithra could be made fresh with very low salt and mild sweetness, or dried, resulting in a much saltier and sharper taste. Blachikon Tyros, or cheese of the Vlachs, was produced by many mountain-dwelling populations and was likely either feta, the well-known Greek brined white cheese, or kaseri, a pale yellow medium-hard cheese. Sarakinon Tyros, or Saracen cheese, was produced by Turks inhabiting inland Anatolia after the Seljuk conquest. This cheese appears to have been widely available in the later Byzantine period. All of the cheeses mentioned were made primarily from sheep milk or a combination of sheep and goat milk. Fish and other seafood were regularly consumed throughout the empire, especially by communities living near the coast. Constantinople in particular was home to large numbers of fishermen who benefited from the abundant waters of the Bosporus Strait. Commonly caught species included tuna, bonito, grey mullet, European sea bass, red mullet, and sole. From the Black Sea, fishermen harvested mackerel and sturgeon, while the Aegean Sea provided sardines, anchovies, sea bream, bluefish, dogfish, rays, and swordfish. Fish was typically cooked fresh with olive oil or preserved by salting or pickling. There are also several references to the consumption of freshwater fish, such as carp and trout. One of the most important seafood-based ingredients was the famous sauce known as gyros. Originally developed by the ancient Greeks and later adopted by the Romans, it became part of Byzantine culinary tradition. The sauce was made by salting small fish or fish entrails and allowing them to ferment in the sun for weeks or even months. This process produced a strong, pungent liquid. Despite its powerful aroma, it was popular in both humble and elite dishes and often served as a substitute for salt. Although it largely disappeared from Western Europe during the Middle Ages, it continued to be produced and consumed in Byzantium well into the late period, gradually fading only about a century after the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Fish eggs were prized as delicacies, or tarichon was a well-known specialty made from salted and preserved grey mullet roe. This product is known today in English as botago, a term likely derived from the original Byzantine Greek name. By the 12th century, wealthy Byzantines also enjoyed caviar obtained from Black Sea sturgeon. Beyond fish and fish products, the Byzantines consumed a wide variety of other seafood. This included soft-bodied marine animals such as octopus, squid, and cuttlefish, as well as numerous crustaceans, including crabs, lobsters, crayfish, and shrimp. Shellfish were also popular and included oysters, mussels, and scallops. Finally, sea urchins were frequently eaten, particularly in the Aegean region. As a deeply Christian empire, Byzantium followed a calendar filled with fasts, with Lent being the most significant period of abstinence. Lasting 4 weeks before Easter, Lent forbade the consumption of all animal products. It was preceded by Tyrini, the cheese week, during which dairy products were still permitted, though meat was already excluded. During fasting periods, diets shifted toward fish, shellfish, and plant-based foods. In stricter fasts, even fish were forbidden. Although fasts ordained by the Orthodox Church covered nearly half the year, their strict observance varied. Meat and animal products were usually still sold in the markets, though far less frequently, and while most people did comply with the fasts, there were always those who did not. The sick and travelers were generally considered less obligated to observe fasting rules, even by priests. Herbs, either fresh or dried, were an essential ingredient in the Byzantine diet, as they were added to nearly every food. Some of the most notable were oregano, thyme, dill, mint, coriander, parsley, fennel, savory, hyssop, bay leaf, rue, lavage, and sometimes marjoram and basil. Mustard was used to make a sauce that usually accompanied meat. Spices were also an important part of the diet, especially for the wealthy who could afford them. Among locally grown spices were mastic, anise, caper, fennel seeds, sesame, saffron, and pepper, while various exotic spices were imported from the south and the east, such as cinnamon, cassia, spikenard, ginger, myrrh, clove, nutmeg, and sugar. Many spices were also used as aromatics in churches, royal courts, and shops. Constantinople was famous for its multi-story spice shops, which, according to travelers, filled the city with fragrant smells. Both fruits and nuts were an essential part of the Byzantine diet. Fresh fruits were eaten when in season, while drying and conserving allowed them to be enjoyed throughout the year. Figs were among the most commonly consumed fruits, including both common figs and sycamore figs. Grapes were also highly valued and widely consumed. Dozens of grape varieties existed throughout the empire, and they were eaten fresh or dried as raisins. Grape juice and grape vinegar were important staples, while wine remained the most famous alcoholic beverage, continuing a tradition inherited from antiquity. Byzantine sources mention numerous varieties of wine, including both plain wines and those flavored with spices. Although wine was the dominant alcoholic drink, the Byzantines in the outer provinces gradually developed a taste for beer and mead as well. Other fruits included apples, pears, quinces, carobs, dates, jujubas, gourds, pomegranates, plums, peaches, melons, watermelons, cherries, and mulberries. Over time, new fruits from the east were introduced, most notably lemons and oranges. Lemons in particular became a staple of Byzantine cuisine. Olives were indispensable to the Byzantine diet and were closely associated with coastal agriculture. They were prepared in various ways, bruised and salted, or preserved in vinegar and honey. Olive oil was equally important and widely used in cooking alongside lard and butter, as mentioned previously. Fruit was eaten on its own, served at the end of meals, or processed into preserves and honeyed sweets. Nuts commonly accompanied fruits in Byzantine cuisine. The most frequently consumed varieties included walnuts, almonds, pistachios, hazelnuts, chestnuts, and pine nuts. The Byzantines loved sweets, and they had a huge variety of them. Honey had been the primary sweetener of the Mediterranean world since antiquity, and it remained so in Byzantium, where it was valued not only for its taste but also for its medicinal properties. Sugar was far more rare and more expensive. It was imported from the east and initially used mainly in pharmaceutical contexts, though by the Middle Byzantine period it also occasionally appeared in luxury desserts. Among the most well-known desserts were spoon sweets made by cooking fruits, peels, nuts, or even flowers in honey or sugar syrup. Fruits were widely used in desserts, with quince marmalade being especially famous. Grain-based sweets formed another important category. Rice, still relatively rare, was most commonly eaten as a dessert, cooked with milk and sweetened with honey. Katastaton, a dish of boiled grain, could be elevated into a luxury sweet with the addition of ground almonds and sugar. Similarly, Alex, made from amber groats, was prepared well boiled and rather watery and seasoned with honey and aromatic spices such as cinnamon and spikenard. A well-known sweet was pastelli, a bar of sesame and honey, sometimes with added spices. In its plain form, it was used by the army as a ration snack due to its longevity. Among the most common sweet pastries were Plakountai, a broad category of pies, cakes, and flat-baked goods. They could be layered or simple, baked or pan-cooked and sweetened with honey. Closely related were the popana, small honey-sweetened cakes prepared for festive occasions, especially around the New Year. Melipikton was a well-known honey cake. These cakes could vary in texture from soft to crumbly and were sometimes flavored with sesame seeds and spices. Melipikta were frequently exchanged as gifts offered at banquets or distributed during religious celebrations. Fried sweets were equally popular. Lalangya were thin pancakes or fritters cooked in olive oil on a griddle or frying pan and drizzled with honey. Sources record their preparation in both monastic and domestic contexts, particularly during commemorations of saints and on the days preceding Lent, where they might also include cheese. Similar honey fritters appear repeatedly in descriptions of feasts and popular celebrations. the Byzantines inherited the culinary traditions of their Roman and Greek ancestors. Roman extravagance and intricate recipes, combined with Greek local products and practices, shaped the core of their cuisine, while they also introduced many innovations, particularly the use of exotic herbs and spices. It is worth noting that they were also pioneers in dining etiquette. Wealthy Byzantines used table forks centuries before they became common elsewhere in the world. Through cultural contact, the fork gradually spread to Western Europe and eventually across the globe.